the lead masks, the true story of Vintame Hill. Jorge de Costa Alves was flying his kite on Vintame Hill when he found the bodies. It was August 20th, 1966, a Saturday afternoon in Niterói, Brazil. Jorge was 18 years old, enjoying the weekend, running through the scrubland at the top of the hill chasing his kite when it tangled in some bushes. He pushed through the vegetation to retrieve it and nearly stepped on a man's hand. Two men were lying side by side on the ground, perfectly arranged, almost peaceful. They wore dark formal suits, pristine white shirts and waterproof raincoats despite the summer heat. Their hands were placed neatly at their sides, and covering their eyes were crude masks made of lead, shaped to fit over the eye sockets, held in place by elastic bands. Jorge ran. He stumbled down the hill, found a police officer, stammered out what he'd seen. The officer didn't believe him at first. Two dead men wearing lead masks on top of a hill. It sounded like a teenager's prank or a bad joke. But Jorge insisted, and eventually the officer agreed to investigate. What they found on Vintame Hill that afternoon would become one of the most baffling unsolved cases in Brazilian history. A mystery that involves electronics technicians, cryptic notes, possible poisoning, UFO cults, and a question that has never been answered. What were Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana trying to do? The bodies were identified quickly. Manuel Pereira de Cruz, 42 years old, and Miguel José Viana, 34 years old, both electronics technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes, a city about 170 miles north of Niterói. They were colleagues, friends, both married with children, both respected in their community. Neither man had a history of mental illness. Neither had financial problems or marital troubles. They were ordinary, stable, employed family men. But here they were, dead on a hill wearing lead masks, far from home, with no obvious cause of death. The police investigation began immediately. Sergeant Ventura Meireles was assigned to the case. He arrived at the scene around 6 p.m. on August 20th and found the bodies exactly as Jorge had described them, arranged neatly, side by side, hands at their sides, faces covered with the strange masks. Sergeant Meireles noted everything in his report. Both men wore dark blue suits, recently cleaned and pressed. White shirts, no ties. Brown leather shoes, polished. Over their suits they wore identical waterproof raincoats, the kind sold in outdoor equipment stores, made of rubberized canvas meant to protect against heavy rain. It was August in Brazil, winter but still warm. The temperature that day had reached 77 degrees Fahrenheit. There was no rain forecasted. Why were they wearing waterproof coats? The lead masks were crude but deliberately constructed. Someone had cut two pieces of thin lead sheeting into rough eye-shaped forms, punched holes in the sides, and threaded elastic bands through to hold them in place. The masks covered the eyes completely, but left the nose and mouth exposed. Why lead and why masks at all? Next to the bodies, Sergeant Meireles found several items. A small bottle, empty, that had contained water. No labels, no distinguishing marks, but it appeared to have been recently emptied. An empty cardboard box, unlabeled. A small towel, damp. And a notebook, spiral-bound, cheap, the kind sold in any stationery store. Inside, written in neat handwriting on a torn page, was a note. 16:30 be at the agreed place. 18:30 swallow capsules. After effect protect metals wait for mask signal. That was all. No other writing in the notebook. Just that single instruction, written in Portuguese, in what appeared to be Manuel's handwriting. Sergeant Meireles read the note 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Swallow capsules. What capsules? Protect metals. What did that mean? And most disturbing, wait for mask signal. Wait for what signal? From whom or from what? The bodies showed no obvious signs of violence. No wounds. No bruising. No evidence of struggle. The men appeared to have simply laid down and died. But people don't just die for no reason. Not two healthy men in their 30s and 40s, not at the same time, not in identical circumstances. Sergeant Merrells ordered the bodies removed for autopsy. He collected all the evidence, and he began trying to piece together what had happened. The investigation into the men's final days began with their families. Manel's wife, Carmela, was devastated. She'd reported him missing 3 days earlier on August 17th when he hadn't come home from what he'd said was a business trip. He'd left on Monday morning, August 15th, telling her he needed to go to Nitre to buy some equipment for work. He'd taken Miguel with him. It was supposed to be a day trip. They'd be back by evening. But they never came home. Carmela waited all day Monday. When Manel didn't return that night, she assumed they'd decided to stay overnight. Maybe the trip had taken longer than expected. But when he didn't return Tuesday either or Wednesday, she went to the police. Miguel's wife, Teresa, told a similar story. Miguel had left Monday morning with Manel, said they were going to Nitre for work, would be back that evening. He'd seemed normal, not anxious, not secretive, just a routine business trip. Neither wife knew anything about lead masks, capsules, or cryptic notes. Neither had any idea what their husbands were planning. The police traced the men's movements from Monday, August 15th. Manel and Miguel had taken a bus from Campos dos Goitacazes to Nitre, departing at 8:30 a.m. The bus driver remembered them, 2 men in suits, carrying a small bag, quiet, keeping to themselves. They arrived in Nitre around 2:00 p.m. From the bus station, they went to a bar. The bartender remembered them because they only ordered water, unusual but not suspicious. They sat for about an hour, didn't talk much, seemed to be waiting for something or someone. At 3:30 p.m., they left the bar and went to a shop that sold laboratory equipment and industrial supplies. The shop owner, Senor Barbosa, remembered them well. They'd asked specifically for lead sheeting, thin, flexible lead that could be cut easily. They'd bought 2 small squares of lead, each about 4 inches by 6 inches. "What did you need the lead for?" Barbosa had asked, more out of curiosity than concern. "Protection," Manel had said, "for work electronics." This wasn't completely unusual. Lead was used in electronics for shielding against radiation. Barbosa sold the lead without further questions. From the supply shop, Manel and Miguel went to a pharmacy. The pharmacist, Dr. Oliveira, didn't remember them specifically. Hundreds of customers came through his pharmacy each day. But the police found a receipt in Manel's wallet, showing they'd purchased something from that pharmacy on Monday afternoon. Dr. Oliveira checked his records. The receipt number corresponded to a sale of vitamina B12 capsules, a common supplement, nothing unusual or dangerous. 20 capsules in a small box. Vitamina B12, swallow capsules. Was this what the note referred to? After the pharmacy, the trail went cold. Nobody remembered seeing the men after approximately 4:30 p.m. on Monday. They didn't check into any hotel. They didn't return to the bus station. They didn't make any phone calls, at least none that could be traced. They simply disappeared for 3 days, until Jorge da Costa Alves found their bodies on Saturday afternoon. The autopsy was conducted on Monday, August 22nd, by Dr. Alberto Rodriguez, the county medical examiner. Given the mysterious circumstances, Dr. Rodriguez was meticulous. He examined every inch of both bodies, looking for any clue to what had killed them. His findings were frustrating. He found nothing. No signs of violence, no wounds, no defensive injuries, no evidence of strangulation, suffocation, or blunt force trauma. The men hadn't been beaten or shot or stabbed. No signs of poisoning, at least none that he could detect with the tests available in 1966. The stomach contents showed partially digested food and what appeared to be remnants of capsules, but without chemical analysis, he couldn't determine what the capsules had contained. No apparent cause of death. Dr. Rodriguez's official conclusion was death by unknown causes, possibly cardiac arrest or poisoning, pending further analysis. But further analysis would never happen. Because of a bureaucratic error, exactly what kind of error was never fully explained. The internal organs that had been removed during the autopsy were accidentally disposed of before advanced toxicology tests could be performed. By the time the error was discovered, it was too late. The organs were gone. The most important evidence in the case had been destroyed. Without tissue samples to test, it was impossible to determine if the men had been poisoned, what poison might have been used, or how it had been administered. The case was at a dead end. Sergeant Merrells continued investigating, but without a cause of death, he had little to work with. He focused on the one piece of evidence that seemed to provide a clue, the cryptic note. 1630 be at the agreed place. 1830 swallow capsules, after effect protect metals wait for mask signal. He analyzed every word. 1630 be at the agreed place suggested a planned meeting. The men were supposed to be somewhere at 4:30 p.m., but where, and meeting whom? Vintame Hill was isolated, difficult to access, not a typical meeting spot. But maybe that was precisely why it was chosen. Privacy, no witnesses, no interruptions. 1830 swallow capsules was clearer. At 6:30 p.m., 2 hours after arriving at the meeting place, they were supposed to swallow something. The vitamina B12 capsules from the pharmacy, or something else. After effect protect metals was baffling. What did protect metals mean? The lead masks. Was lead supposed to protect them from something? And most mysterious, wait for mask signal. Not put on masks and wait, but wait for mask signal. As if the masks themselves were supposed to receive some kind of signal, or as if something else, some external source, was supposed to send a signal and the masks would protect them from it. Sergeant Merrells interviewed everyone who'd known the men. Colleagues, friends, family members. He asked about their interests, their hobbies, their beliefs. And slowly, a picture emerged that made the case even stranger. Manuel and Miguel had been interested in spiritualism. This wasn't unusual in 1960s Brazil. Spiritualism, the belief that spirits of the dead can communicate with the living, was widespread and socially acceptable. Millions of Brazilians attended spiritualist sessions, consulted with mediums, believed in communication with other dimensions. But Manuel and Miguel's interest went beyond casual attendance at spiritualist meetings. They were involved in a particular subset of spiritualism that combined traditional beliefs with modern technology and UFO phenomena. Several of their colleagues remembered conversations where Manuel had talked about psychic television, the idea that it might be possible to build electronic devices that could receive transmissions from other dimensions or from extraterrestrial beings. He'd been fascinated by the work of Thomas Edison, who had supposedly claimed late in his life that he was trying to build a device to communicate with the dead. Miguel had been equally fascinated. He'd read extensively about UFO sightings, about reports of people making contact with alien beings, about theories that extraterrestrial intelligence was trying to communicate with humanity, but we lacked the proper equipment to receive the signals. Both men had attended meetings of a group that called itself the Scientific Spiritualists of Campos. The group, about 20 members, mostly educated professionals, met monthly to discuss how modern science and technology could be used to facilitate contact with spiritual entities or extraterrestrial intelligence. It sounded fringe, but it wasn't uncommon. The 1960s were full of such groups, especially in Brazil, where spiritualism had deep cultural roots and where the UFO phenomenon was experiencing a surge of popular interest. In 1966, Brazil was in the midst of a UFO wave. Sightings were being reported frequently. Newspapers ran stories about unexplained lights in the sky, strange objects hovering over cities, people who claimed to have encountered alien beings. One particularly famous case had occurred just 5 months before Manuel and Miguel's deaths. In March 1966, a man named Inácio de Souza, a farmer in the interior of Brazil, claimed to have encountered a UFO that landed on his property. When he approached with a rifle, the craft emitted a beam of light that hit him. He died of leukemia-like symptoms 3 months later, and his death was attributed by believers to radiation from the UFO. The case had been widely reported. Everyone in Brazil knew about it. Had Manuel and Miguel been trying to make contact with a UFO? Was that what the note meant by wait for mask signal, waiting for a signal from an extraterrestrial craft? Sergeant Meirelles found one of the members of the scientific spiritualists group, a man named Paulo Costa, and asked him directly, were Manuel and Miguel planning some kind of UFO contact experiment? Paulo was hesitant but eventually admitted they'd been talking about it, about trying to receive transmissions, about building equipment that could detect signals from other dimensions, but it was all theoretical. We never actually tried anything. Why the lead masks? Meirelles asked. Protection, Paulo said. They believed that contact with other dimensional beings or extraterrestrial intelligence might involve harmful radiation. They'd read about the farmer who died. They didn't want that to happen to them. They thought lead would protect them, the same way lead is used to shield against X-rays. And the capsules? Paulo shook his head. I don't know about capsules. We never discussed using drugs or substances. Unless they thought something would help them be more receptive. Some people in spiritualist movements use psychoactive substances to facilitate spiritual experiences, but Manuel and Miguel never mentioned that to me. The investigation continued through September 1966. Sergeant Meirelles interviewed dozens of people, followed every lead, tried every angle. But without a cause of death, without physical evidence, without witnesses, the case went nowhere. The official conclusion, filed in October 1966, was inconclusive. Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana died of undetermined causes on or about August 17, 1966, on Vintame Hill, Nitre. Circumstances suggest possible poisoning, possibly self-administered, for purposes unknown. Case remains open pending new evidence. No new evidence ever emerged. The case should have ended there. 2 men dead in mysterious circumstances, a puzzling note, no answers. It should have become a forgotten curiosity in police files. But then the media got hold of it. The story of the lead masks of Vintame Hill was first reported in September 1966 in a Rio de Janeiro newspaper. The article focused on the bizarre details. The masks, the cryptic note, the mysterious deaths. The story went viral, in pre-internet terms, which meant it was picked up by newspapers across Brazil, then across South America, then internationally. By October 1966, the lead masks case was being discussed in newspapers in the United States, Europe, and Asia. Everyone had theories. The most popular theory, especially in UFO circles, was that Manuel and Miguel had been trying to make contact with extraterrestrial beings, and something had gone wrong. Maybe they'd succeeded in making contact, but the aliens had killed them. Maybe they'd been exposed to harmful radiation from a UFO. Maybe they'd been taken temporarily by aliens and returned dead. Believers pointed to the note, "Wait for mask signal." This clearly suggested they were expecting something to happen, some kind of signal or contact. The lead masks were protection against radiation. The capsules might have been to alter their consciousness to facilitate contact. Skeptics had different explanations. Some suggested it was a suicide pact, motivated by cult beliefs or shared delusions. The men had taken poison together, believing they would transcend to another dimension or be taken by aliens. The lead masks were part of the ritual, symbolic rather than functional. Others suggested foul play. Maybe the men had been involved in something illegal, drug dealing, smuggling, espionage, and had been murdered by people who staged the scene to look like a bizarre suicide or accident, knowing the strange details would distract from the real motive. Still others suggested the men had been victims of someone else's experiment. Maybe they'd been recruited by a secret organization or government agency to test some kind of equipment or procedure. Maybe the mask signal they were waiting for was supposed to come from experimenters who never showed up, or who showed up and administered poison, then left. Every theory had problems. Every explanation left questions unanswered. The case became a fixture of Brazilian popular culture. Books were written about it. Documentaries were made. The lead masks of Vintame Hill became one of Brazil's most famous unsolved mysteries, alongside the disappearance of Colonel Fawcett and the strange lights of Colares. But no new evidence emerged, no witnesses came forward, no deathbed confessions, no documents uncovered. The mystery remained unsolved. In 1999, 33 years after the deaths, a Brazilian researcher named Carlos José Gualberto reopened the case. He wasn't a police officer. The case had been officially closed decades earlier, but a journalist and amateur investigator fascinated by unsolved mysteries. Gualberto spent 2 years reinvestigating. He interviewed surviving family members, tracked down former members of the scientific spiritualist group, examined the evidence that still existed. He uncovered some new information, though nothing definitive. He found that in the weeks before their deaths, Manuel and Miguel had been attending meetings of a smaller, more secretive group, a splinter faction of the scientific spiritualists that was more radical in its beliefs and methods. This group, which called itself the Pioneers of the New Dimension, believed that humanity was on the verge of making contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, but that most people weren't ready for it. They believed a select few, those with the right knowledge, the right equipment, the right mental preparation, could facilitate contact. Manuel and Miguel had apparently been convinced they could be among those pioneers. Gualberto also found a witness who'd been on Vintame Hill on the afternoon of August 17, 1966, the day the men likely died. The witness, a woman named Gracinda Barbosa de Souza, had been on the hill looking for mushrooms when she'd seen something strange. She described seeing 2 men in suits lying on the ground and near them, a bright orange light hovering in the air. Not a helicopter, not a plane, just a light, glowing about the size of a small car, hovering silently about 30 feet above the ground. Gracinda had been frightened and left quickly. She'd never reported what she'd seen because she didn't want people to think she was crazy. Gualberto asked why she'd come forward now, 33 years later. "Because they're dead," she said simply. "Because maybe my testimony will help someone understand what happened to them. I saw that light. I don't know what it was, but it was there." Gualberto included Gracinda's testimony in his report, though he acknowledged it couldn't be verified. She was the only witness. She'd waited 33 years to tell her story. Memory after that much time was unreliable. But her description matched some UFO reports from the same era. Orange lights, silent hovering, sudden appearances and disappearances. Had Manuel and Miguel succeeded in their contact attempt? Had something actually appeared on Vintame Hill that day? Or had Gracinda, knowing the story of the lead masks and influenced by decades of UFO culture, constructed a false memory that fit the narrative? There was no way to know. In 2006, 40 years after the deaths, a Brazilian documentary team decided to investigate the case using modern forensic techniques. They brought in toxicologists, forensic pathologists, psychologists, and a physicist to examine all available evidence and develop a comprehensive theory. The team couldn't perform new autopsies. The bodies had been buried 40 years earlier, but they could analyze the evidence that remained: photographs, police reports, witness statements, the cryptic note. Their conclusions, presented in a 2007 documentary called The Lead Masks, 40 years later, provided a possible explanation. The capsules theory. The team suggested that the vitamin B12 capsules from the pharmacy were not what killed the men. Instead, they theorized that Mantle and Miguel had obtained different capsules, possibly containing a psychoactive substance, from someone in their spiritualist group. In the 1960s, psychedelic drugs were becoming popular in countercultural circles worldwide. In Brazil, certain spiritualist groups were experimenting with ayahuasca and other traditional psychoactive plants, believing they could facilitate spiritual experiences or contact with other dimensions. The toxicologist suggested that Mantle and Miguel might have taken capsules containing a powerful psychedelic, believing it would help them perceive signals from extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings. But someone, either deliberately or through incompetence, gave them something more dangerous. Perhaps the capsules were contaminated with a toxic substance. Perhaps the dose was too high. Perhaps the substance interacted with something else they'd consumed. The psychedelic effects would explain why they lay down calmly, why there were no signs of struggle. If they were hallucinating, believing they were communicating with aliens or spirits, they might have been peaceful even as they died. The lead masks would make sense in this context: protection against perceived radiation, based on their beliefs about UFOs and the dangers of contact. The note would be their protocol: arrive at the location, wait until the agreed time, take the capsules, put on protective masks, wait for the signal, which they believed would come from extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional sources, but which was really just the onset of the drug effects. The verdict asterisk. This theory was plausible. It explained most of the evidence. It didn't require belief in UFOs or extra-dimensional beings, just belief that Mantle and Miguel believed in those things and acted on that belief. But it was still just a theory. Without tissue samples, without the capsules themselves, without any physical evidence of what substance they'd taken, it couldn't be proven. The documentary concluded, "We will probably never know with certainty what happened on Vintame Hill, but the most likely explanation is that two men, driven by genuine belief in contact with other intelligences, took part in an experiment that went tragically wrong. They died not from alien contact but from human error, a contaminated or excessive dose of a psychoactive substance, given by someone who didn't understand the danger, taken by two men who believed they were pioneers on the frontier of human experience." Today, 58 years after their deaths, Manuel Pereira de Cruz and Miguel José Viana remain enigmatic figures. The case file is still officially open, though no active investigation continues. Vintame Hill is now a public park. Hikers occasionally visit the location where the bodies were found, though there's no marker, no memorial, just scrubland and rocks and a view of Nitri below. The lead masks themselves and most of the original evidence have been lost. They were stored in police archives for decades, but disappeared during a filing reorganization in the 1980s. Photographs remain, but the physical objects are gone. The case continues to fascinate. Every few years, a new book or documentary appears, offering a new theory, re-examining the evidence, trying to solve the mystery. But the fundamental questions remain unanswered. What were Mantle and Miguel really trying to do? What was in the capsules they swallowed? What were they waiting for on that hill? And did they find it in those final moments, before whatever killed them took effect? I've thought about this case a lot over the years. About two ordinary men, technicians, family men, people with jobs and responsibilities, who went to a hill wearing lead masks and died waiting for something. What drives people to that? What belief is powerful enough to make you leave your home, lie to your wife, travel to an isolated hilltop, and take mysterious capsules while wearing crude radiation shields, all because you think you might make contact with something from beyond? It's easy to dismiss them as deluded, to say they were foolish, that they fell victim to cult thinking or pseudoscience, that they died because they believed nonsense. But I think it's more complicated than that. Manuel and Miguel lived in an era of transformation. The 1960s were a time when humanity was reaching into space, when technology was advancing rapidly, when the impossible was becoming possible. We'd put satellites in orbit. We were planning to land on the moon. The universe was opening up in ways previous generations couldn't have imagined. And alongside the official space program, there was a widespread belief, shared by millions of people worldwide, that we weren't alone, that other intelligences existed, that contact might be possible. It wasn't just fringe believers. Serious scientists were discussing the possibility of extraterrestrial life, of communication with alien civilizations. SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, was being established. The idea of contact was in the air. Manuel and Miguel were products of that era. They believed, genuinely and deeply, that contact was possible, that with the right equipment, the right preparation, the right mindset, they could be among the first to make it happen. Were they right? Almost certainly not. But their belief was real. Their hope was real. And whatever happened on Vintame Hill, they died pursuing something they thought mattered, something they thought was important enough to risk their lives for. That doesn't make them fools, it makes them believers. And belief, whether in God, in science, in progress, in contact with other worlds, drives humans to do extraordinary things, sometimes wonderful things, sometimes tragic things. The lead mask's case is tragic. 2 men died. 2 families were devastated. For what? For a signal that probably never came from beings that probably don't exist, using equipment that probably couldn't work. But it's also strangely inspiring, because it shows humans reaching, striving, hopping, trying to connect with something larger than themselves, believing that wonders are possible. They were wrong, they died. The mystery remains unsolved. But they believed they were pioneers. They believed they were standing on the frontier of human knowledge, waiting for contact that would change everything. And in that moment on that hill, wearing their crude lead masks, waiting for their signal, they were pioneers, not of extraterrestrial contact, but of human belief, human hope, human willingness to reach for the impossible. Even if it killed them. Even if we never understand why. The note remains, wait for mask signal. They waited. Whatever signal they received, whether hallucination, poisoning, or something else, it took them. And we're left with the mystery, the questions, the lead masks. And 2 men who died believing in something larger than themselves, even if that something was never real at all.